Welcome back to the channel. Good to have you here. Before we begin, I want you to think about something. When you picture ancient history, really ancient history, what comes to mind? Egypt's pyramids, perhaps. Maybe Rome's Colosseum. But what if I told you there are structures scattered across this planet that are far older than any of those? Places that existed thousands of years before the first pharaoh ever sat on a throne. Places that shouldn't exist at all, given what we think we know about our ancestors. How did people who supposedly lived in simple hunter-gatherer societies move stones weighing dozens of tons? Why did they align their monuments with such precision to celestial events they shouldn't have understood? And perhaps most puzzling of all, why do we find the same architectural ideas, the same astronomical knowledge appearing independently in cultures separated by oceans and millennia? These aren't just old rocks arranged in interesting patterns. These are engineered structures that required planning, mathematics, astronomy, and a level of social organization that makes archaeologists deeply uncomfortable. Because acknowledging what these places represent means rewriting significant chapters of human history. It means admitting that our ancestors were far more capable, far more knowledgeable, and far more connected than we've given them credit for. Over the next hour or so, we're going to visit 15 of these places. Some you may have heard of. Others have remained virtually unknown, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Each location presents its own set of mysteries. Each one challenges our understanding of the past. And together, they paint a picture of ancient human civilization that simply doesn't fit the narrative we've been taught. We're not here to provide easy answers. We're here to look at the evidence, examine the questions, and maybe, just maybe, walk away, understanding that history is far stranger and more complex than any textbook has ever suggested. So let's begin this journey. Let's visit these forgotten places, one by one, and see what secrets they're still willing to share. In 1963, an American archaeologist working in southeastern Turkey noticed something odd about a particular hill. The locals called it Göbekli Tepe, Potbelly Hill, in Turkish. Nothing remarkable about the name, just another rise in the landscape, covered in scattered limestone fragments. The archaeologist noted it and moved on. The hill sat undisturbed for another 3 decades. Then, in 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt decided to take a closer look. What he found buried beneath that unremarkable hill would force the archaeological community to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the origin of civilization. Because Göbekli Tepe isn't just old, it's impossibly old. The structures here date back to approximately 9,600 BCE. That's nearly 12,000 years ago. To put that in perspective, this site was already ancient when the first stones of Stonehenge were being laid. The Great Pyramid, that wouldn't be built for another 7,000 years. The site consists of massive limestone pillars, each carved into a T shape, some reaching 18 feet in height and weighing up to 16 tons. These pillars are arranged in circles, with 2 larger pillars standing in the center of each ring. And they're not just shaped stones, they're covered in elaborate carvings, scorpions, snakes, foxes, wild boars, vultures, lions. The craftsmanship is remarkable. These aren't crude scratchings. These are sophisticated relief carvings that required skill, planning, and time. Here's where it gets interesting. According to conventional archaeological theory, the people who built Göbekli Tepe shouldn't have been capable of this. In 9600 BCE, humans were hunter-gatherers. They moved with the seasons, following game and wild plants. They hadn't invented agriculture yet. They hadn't domesticated animals. They hadn't even invented pottery. And yet somehow, these supposedly primitive people quarried massive stones, transported them up a hill, carved them with precision tools, and erected them into complex, circular structures. The orthodox explanation goes something like this. Göbekli Tepe was a ceremonial site, a temple complex where different hunter-gatherer groups came together for ritual purposes. The effort required to build it supposedly motivated these groups to develop agriculture. They needed to feed all the workers, after all. Construction and religion drove civilization forward, not the other way around. It's a neat theory, but it raises more questions than it answers. Where did these hunter-gatherers learn to work stone with such precision? How did they coordinate labor on this scale, without any apparent social hierarchy? Ground-penetrating radar suggests there are at least 20 additional circular structures still buried. The excavated portion represents less than 5% of the total site. Who builds something this massive, this complex, and then deliberately buries it? Because that's what happened. Around 8000 BCE, for reasons no one understands, the entire site was carefully filled in with soil and debris. Not destroyed, not abandoned. Buried, preserved, hidden. Some researchers have found what appear to be symbols or a primitive writing system on the pillars, repeated abstract marks that might represent a language we can't read. Others point to the astronomical alignments of certain pillars, suggesting the builders possess sophisticated knowledge of the heavens. The traditional narrative of human development follows a straightforward path. We learned to farm, which gave us surplus food, which allowed us to form villages, which led to specialization and eventually to civilization. Göbekli Tepe turns that narrative upside down. It suggests that our ancestors were creating monumental architecture, developing complex belief systems, and organizing large-scale projects thousands of years before they supposedly had the means to do so. Stand here at sunset, when the tourists have gone and the site falls silent, and you can almost feel the weight of those missing millennia. 12,000 years. That's 600 generations. Who were these people? What did they believe? What knowledge did they possess that we've lost? And why, after all that effort, did they choose to hide their creation beneath the earth? In the far south of Armenia, not far from the town of Sisian, there's a place the locals call ZORATS, the Army of Stones. Most of the world knows it by another name, CARAHUNGE, deliberately evocative of Stonehenge, though whether the comparison is fair remains hotly debated. What isn't debatable is this: the site exists, it's old, and it's strange. 223 stones, arranged in a rough circle, many of them standing upright, some reaching 9 feet in height. But it's not the arrangement that makes CARAHUNGE unusual, it's the holes. Dozens of these stones have been carefully drilled with circular holes, some of them polished smooth on the interior. These aren't natural formations. These are engineered features created with purpose and precision. The site dates back at least 5,500 years, though some researchers argue it could be considerably older, perhaps as old as 7,500 years. That would place it in the same general time frame as the later phases of Göbekli Tepe and make it one of the oldest astronomical observatories in the world. Because that's what many believe CARAHUNGE was, an ancient observatory, a place where early astronomers studied the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. A Russian archaeologist named Paris Heruni studied the site extensively in the 1990s and published findings that shocked the academic community. According to Heruni's calculations, many of the holes align with specific astronomical events: sunrise and sunset at the solstices, the rising positions of bright stars like Sirius and Vega. Some holes point toward the horizon, others toward the zenith. Together, they form what Heruni believed was a functioning observatory, allowing ancient astronomers to track celestial movements with remarkable accuracy. Not everyone agrees with Heruni's conclusions. Some archaeologists argue that the holes served more mundane purposes. Perhaps they held wooden posts for tents or structures. Others suggest they might have been used to secure ropes for moving the stones. The problem with these alternative explanations is that they don't account for the careful positioning of the stones themselves or the polished interiors of many holes, which suggest they were meant to provide unobstructed views of the sky. There's also a necropolis at CARAHUNGE, ancient tombs dating to the Bronze Age, much younger than the stone circle itself. This raises interesting questions about continuity of use. Did later cultures recognize this as a sacred or important site? Did they understand what it had been used for? Or did they simply see impressive stones and decide this was an appropriate place to bury their dead? The Armenian highlands have brutal winters. The people who built CARAHUNGE would have experienced long, dark nights when survival depended on knowing when to plant, when to harvest, when to move livestock to different pastures. An observatory makes practical sense, but it also requires a level of astronomical knowledge we don't usually associate with Stone Age cultures. These weren't people making casual observations. They were drilling stones, positioning them with precision, creating an instrument that could track the heavens across years and generations. There's something else here that doesn't get discussed often. Some of the stones at CARAHUNGE have what appear to be carvings, weathered, almost invisible unless you know where to look, and the light hits just right. Spirals, concentric circles, abstract patterns that might mean nothing or might represent something we no longer understand. Researchers have found similar symbols at other megalithic sites across Europe and Asia, suggesting either cultural contact or independent development of shared ideas. That's the deeper mystery of places like CARAHUNGE. Not just that they exist, but that they represent sophisticated thinking, abstract reasoning, long-term planning, mathematical understanding, astronomical knowledge. And we find this sophistication appearing independently in multiple locations at roughly the same time in human history. Either ancient cultures were far more connected than we believe, or human cognitive development reached a critical threshold simultaneously across different continents. Neither explanation fits comfortably into orthodox history, and so CARAHUNGE remains what it has always been: a field of stones with holes, standing silent on an Armenian mountain, keeping secrets we may never fully uncover. The coast of Brittany in northwestern France is Celtic country, land of myths and legends, ancient traditions that survived into the modern age. And here, just north of the town of CARNAC, you'll find something that defies easy explanation. 3,000 standing stones, arranged in nearly perfect parallel rows that stretch for miles across the landscape. Some rows contain just a few hundred stones. Others contain more than 1,000. Together, they form the largest megalithic site in the world. These aren't small rocks. Some of the menhirs, that's the term for these standing stones, reach 13 feet in height and weigh several tons. They were quarried from local granite, shaped, transported, and erected with considerable effort. And this happened between 4,500 and 3,300 BCE, during the Neolithic period, when the people of Brittany were just beginning to transition from hunting and gathering to settled agriculture. The rows run roughly east to west, with the tallest stones generally positioned at the western end of each alignment. At both ends of the main alignments, you'll find stone circles or semicircles, as if the rows were meant to connect these circular enclosures. The precision is remarkable. Despite being constructed over 1,000 years or more, the rows maintain their parallel orientation across uneven terrain, through valleys and over rises. So what was it for? Ask 10 archaeologists, and you'll get 10 different answers. The most common theory holds that CARNAC was a ceremonial site, that the alignments marked processional routes used during religious festivals. Some researchers point to the astronomical alignments. Certain rows point toward the summer solstice sunrise or winter solstice sunset, suggesting the stones functioned as a massive calendar. Others have proposed more elaborate theories. One French researcher suggested the stones mark ancient earthquake fault lines and that Neolithic people somehow understood geological activity. Another theory holds that the rows represent a vast astronomical calculator, allowing ancient priests to predict lunar eclipses and planetary movements. Still others believe the alignments mark ancient trade routes or boundary lines between tribal territories. The problem with all these theories is that none of them fully explain why you'd need 3,000 stones arranged in this specific pattern. A calendar requires far fewer markers. A processional route doesn't need 1,000 stones in perfect parallel formation. And if these marked territorial boundaries, why arrange them with such geometric precision? There's also the question of the smaller stones scattered throughout the area. In addition to the main alignments, you'll find dolmens, stone tombs consisting of large, flat stones supported by vertical stones. Some are simple, others elaborately constructed with passage entrances and inner chambers. The CARNAC region contains more than 30 dolmens, many of them aligned with the stone rows or positioned near them. This suggests the stones served multiple purposes over time. Perhaps they began as territorial markers or astronomical observatories, and later generations incorporated them into burial practices and religious ceremonies. Or maybe the entire complex was planned from the beginning as a unified sacred landscape, with the alignments, circles, and tombs working together as parts of a larger whole we no longer understand. Local legends offer their own explanations. One story claims the stones are a Roman legion turned to stone by the wizard Merlin. Another says they're pagan soldiers petrified by Pope Cornelius. These are Christian-era stories, attempts by later cultures to explain monuments they didn't build and couldn't understand. But they reveal something important. For thousands of years, people have looked at these stones and known they represented something significant, even when the original meaning had been lost. Modern analysis has revealed something interesting about how the stones were placed. The taller, heavier stones at the western ends of each alignment sit in deeper holes, suggesting they were erected first, possibly as anchor points. The smaller stones were added later, filling in the rows eastward. This implies a construction process that took decades, perhaps centuries, with each generation adding to what their ancestors had begun. That kind of multi-generational project requires cultural continuity, a shared vision passed down from parents to children, a commitment to completing something that no single person would live to see finished. It requires a level of social organization and purpose that challenges our assumptions about Neolithic societies. Stand at one end of the Camario alignment and look east. The stones seem to go on forever, each one slightly different in shape and size, but all part of an undeniable pattern. What you're seeing is the product of human determination, thousands of hours of labor, countless decisions about where to place each stone, all guided by a purpose we can only guess at. The stones remain, the purpose has vanished into time. 200 miles west of Abu Simbel, deep in the Nubian desert of southern Egypt, there's a place that hasn't seen regular rainfall in thousands of years. It's called NABTA PLAYA, and today it's one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Scorching heat, no water, nothing but sand and rock as far as you can see. But 10,000 years ago, this was a lake, a seasonal lake, filling during the African monsoon season, attracting game animals and the people who hunted them. Those people left something behind: standing stones, arranged in circles and alignments, dozens of stone structures scattered across the dried lake bed, and beneath the sand, archaeologists have found evidence of settlement: hearths, storage pits, the remains of structures. This was one of the earliest known attempts at permanent settlement in human history, dating back to at least 7,500 BCE, possibly earlier. The most famous feature at NABTA PLAYA is what researchers call the calendar circle, a ring of stone slabs, some standing upright, others lying flat, arranged around a central point. In 1998, an astronomer named Kim Malville studied the site and concluded that the circle was aligned to the summer solstice. On the longest day of the year, the rising sun would have aligned precisely with certain stones in the circle, marking the beginning of the monsoon season when the lake would fill with water. That's impressive enough, but there's more. Malville and other researchers identified additional alignments that seem to track not just the sun, but specific stars. 3 stones in the circle align with the belt stars of Orion as they appeared in the sky around 6000 BCE. Another alignment pointed toward the star Sirius, whose appearance in the pre-dawn sky traditionally marked the annual flooding of the Nile in ancient Egypt, and would have coincided with the monsoon rains at NABTA PLAYA. So we're looking at a sophisticated astronomical observatory built by people who are supposedly just beginning to transition from nomadic hunting to seasonal settlement. These weren't people with written language or metal tools. They were using stone and bone implements, living in temporary shelters, moving with the seasons, and yet they possessed astronomical knowledge detailed enough to track stellar positions across years and to predict seasonal events critical to their survival. But the calendar circle isn't the most mysterious part of NABTA PLAYA. That distinction belongs to what archaeologists found buried beneath some of the stone structures. In the late 1990s, excavations revealed massive stone blocks weighing up to 3 tons, buried vertically in the sand like enormous stone teeth. These weren't natural formations. They'd been shaped and deliberately placed underground, hidden from view. Why would anyone go to the enormous effort of quarrying, shaping, and burying massive stones that no one would ever see? One theory suggests they're symbolic burials, perhaps representing prominent individuals or important events. Another possibility is that they marked underground water sources, though why you'd need 3-ton stone markers for that purpose remains unclear. There's also evidence of cattle burials at NABTA PLAYA, complete cow skeletons, carefully arranged in stone-lined pits. This is significant because it suggests these people weren't just hunting cattle, they were herding them, possibly even in the early stages of domestication. That would make NABTA PLAYA one of the earliest sites of animal husbandry in Africa, predating similar developments in Mesopotamia by several thousand years. Some researchers have drawn a direct line from NABTA PLAYA to ancient Egyptian civilization. They point out that the astronomical knowledge displayed here, particularly the focus on Orion and Sirius, would later become central to Egyptian religious beliefs. The Egyptians associated Orion with Osiris, god of the afterlife, and Sirius with Isis, his wife. The annual appearance of Sirius in the pre-dawn sky marked the new year in the Egyptian calendar. Could the people of NABTA PLAYA have been the ancestors of the ancient Egyptians? Did they carry their astronomical knowledge with them as climate change forced them to abandon the increasingly arid Nubian desert and move toward the Nile Valley? It's a compelling theory, though difficult to prove. The archaeological record shows a gap of several thousand years between the abandonment of NABTA PLAYA around 4000 BCE and the emergence of the Egyptian Old Kingdom around 2700 BCE. But the knowledge clearly persisted somehow. The precision of Egyptian astronomical calculations, their obsession with stellar alignments, their ability to orient massive structures to cardinal directions, these capabilities had to come from somewhere. They didn't appear fully formed. NABTA PLAYA might represent a crucial missing link in that development. Today, the desert is reclaiming NABTA PLAYA. The stones are slowly being covered by shifting dunes. In another few centuries, the site might be completely hidden, waiting for some future generation of archaeologists to rediscover it. But the knowledge encoded in those stone alignments, the careful observation of the heavens, the understanding of recurring celestial cycles, that knowledge became part of human civilization, passed down through millennia, transforming from practical survival skills into the foundation of astronomy, mathematics, and eventually science itself. The stones may disappear. The knowledge remains. 13,000 feet above sea level, on the windswept altiplano of Bolivia, there's a place called Puma Punku, the door of the puma in the Aymara language. At first glance, it looks like the aftermath of some enormous catastrophe. Massive stone blocks, some weighing more than 100 tons, scattered across the landscape. Many are broken, others lie overturned. A few remain in place, hinting at structures that once stood here but have long since collapsed. What makes Puma Punku remarkable isn't just the size of these stones, though that's impressive enough. It's the precision of the stonework. These aren't rough-hewn boulders. They're precisely shaped blocks with perfectly flat surfaces, right angles exact to within fractions of a degree. and complex interlocking joints that fit together without mortar. Some blocks feature grooves and channels cut into their surfaces with geometric accuracy that would be challenging even with modern tools. The conventional dating places Puma Punku at around 536 CE, part of the larger Tiwanaku culture that dominated this region for centuries. But some researchers have questioned that timeline, pointing to evidence of water erosion on the stones. Curious, given that Puma Punku sits in one of the driest regions of South America. That erosion, they argue, could only have occurred during a much wetter climate period, possibly thousands of years earlier. The stones themselves present another mystery. They're made from two types of rock, red sandstone and andesite. The sandstone could have been quarried relatively nearby, though transporting blocks weighing dozens of tons across miles of rough terrain would still have been an enormous undertaking. But the andesite is a different story. The nearest source for that particular type of volcanic rock is on the far shore of Lake Titicaca, more than 50 miles away. Some of these andesite blocks weigh over 100 tons. Think about that for a moment. We're at 13,000 feet elevation. The air is thin enough that physical exertion becomes difficult after just a few minutes. And somehow, the people who built Puma Punku moved 100-ton stones across 50 miles of difficult terrain, including a crossing of Lake Titicaca, then transported them up to this high plateau with no wheeled vehicles, no draft animals large enough to move such massive loads, no metal tools harder than bronze. The H-blocks are particularly puzzling. These stones are shaped like a capital H when viewed from above, with two parallel grooves running through their centers. They fit together in a complex pattern, each block precisely positioned relative to its neighbors. But the site is so thoroughly destroyed that archaeologists have never been able to reconstruct exactly what structure these blocks were part of. All that remains is the scattered pieces of an enormous stone puzzle. Some of the blocks have small, precisely drilled holes, cylindrical and perpendicular to the stone surface. The level of precision required to drill these holes, especially in andesite, which is extremely hard, is difficult to explain using the technology supposedly available to the Tiwanaku people. Bronze tools can work andesite, but slowly and with tremendous effort. To achieve the level of precision visible at Puma Punku would require harder tools, probably advanced knowledge of stone properties, and techniques we don't see evidence of anywhere else in the archaeological record of South America. The standard explanation goes like this. The Tiwanaku people were master stone workers who developed sophisticated techniques for quarrying, transporting, and shaping stones. They used copper and bronze tools, possibly combined with harder stone tools, to achieve the precision we see. They moved the massive blocks using rope, wooden rollers, and vast amounts of human labor. The structures at Puma Punku were later destroyed, either by earthquakes or by Spanish conquistadors looking for building materials, which explains the scattered, broken state of the stones. It's a reasonable explanation. It accounts for most of the observable facts, but it leaves some uncomfortable questions hanging. Where are the quarry marks on the andesite blocks? How did they measure and cut these stones to such precision without modern surveying equipment? And perhaps most puzzling, why? Why invest so much effort, so much labor, so much organizational capacity into creating structures of such refined precision in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. Some of the blocks feature relief carvings, geometric patterns, stylized faces, abstract designs that might represent writing or might be purely decorative. A few researchers have claimed to identify astronomical information encoded in these patterns, alignments to solstices and equinoxes, mathematical constants like pi hidden in the proportions of the blocks. Most archaeologists dismiss these claims as pareidolia, the human tendency to find patterns in random data. But here's the thing. Whether or not those specific claims are true, the precision of Puma Punku is undeniable. These aren't accidents of nature. They're engineered structures created by people who understood geometry, who could work with remarkable accuracy, who had the organizational capacity to complete massive construction projects in one of the harshest environments on the planet. The Aymara people, descendants of the TIWANAKU, have their own explanation. They say Puma Punku wasn't built by humans at all, but by the gods during a single night, creating it fully formed in the darkness before the first sunrise. According to their legends, this was one of the first places created in the world, a sacred site that existed before the current age of humanity. Modern archaeology rejects these legends as myth, but myths often preserve kernels of truth, distorted and elaborated over centuries of retelling. What if Puma Punku really is far older than we think? What if the TIWANAKU people discovered these ruins already ancient, already scattered, and incorporated them into their own culture and beliefs? We may never know. What we do know is that something extraordinary happened here, at 13,000 feet, in the thin air of the Altiplano. Something that challenges our understanding of what ancient people were capable of achieving. The stones remain. The answers do not. If Puma Punku is the mysterious prologue, TIWANAKU is the main chapter. Less than a mile to the north, you'll find what was once the ceremonial and administrative heart of an empire that dominated the Altiplano for more than 1,000 years. Massive stone platforms, truncated pyramids, sunken courtyards, and monolithic sculptures that stand as silent witnesses to a civilization that thrived at altitudes where most people struggle just to breathe. The centerpiece of TIWANAKU is the Kalasasaya, a raised platform measuring about 400 feet by 400 feet, surrounded by walls of massive sandstone blocks. On the platform sits the Gateway of the Sun, perhaps the most iconic artifact of the entire site. It's a single block of andesite, 10 feet high, 12 feet wide, carved into an elaborate doorway. Above the opening, a figure, possibly the creator god Viracocha, stares out with geometric eyes, surrounded by intricate reliefs of running figures and geometric patterns. The precision of the gateway is remarkable. The doorway is cut perfectly perpendicular to the stone's surface. The reliefs are carved with such detail that you can make out individual feathers on the running figures, each no more than an inch tall. This is andesite, remember, one of the hardest stones available in South America. Carving it requires tremendous skill, proper tools, and patience. Lots of patience. But here's something interesting. The Gateway of the Sun wasn't found standing upright in its current location. When archaeologists first documented the site in the 19th century, the gateway was lying face down in the mud, partially broken. Someone lifted it, restored it, and placed it where visitors see it today. We don't actually know where it originally stood or what structure it was part of. For all we know, it could have been the entrance to a building that no longer exists, or it might have stood alone as a ceremonial marker. Nearby, partially buried in the ground, archaeologists have found other monolithic sculptures, massive human figures carved from single blocks of stone. The most famous is the Bennett monolith, a statue over 24 feet tall, weighing approximately 20 tons. It depicts a standing figure covered head to toe in intricate carvings, fish, geometric patterns, possibly astronomical symbols. The scale is staggering. This single statue would have required a tremendous investment of time and labor just to carve, let alone transport and erect. Then there's the Akapana pyramid, or what remains of it. This was once a massive stepped platform, nearly 60 feet high, covering an area of almost 5 acres. Recent excavations revealed something unexpected: a sophisticated hydraulic system built into the pyramid structure. Stone channels, filtration systems, collection basins, all designed to manage water flow during the rainy season. Some researchers believe the pyramid was designed to function as a kind of giant water temple, with water cascading down its stepped sides during ceremonies. The engineering required to build something like this is considerable. The pyramid's core consists of carefully placed clay and sand, designed to allow water to percolate through without causing erosion or structural failure. The outer facing was made of precisely fitted sandstone blocks, and all of this was constructed at 13,000 feet elevation, where the thin air makes even simple physical tasks exhausting. Orthodox archaeology dates the height of Tiwanaku to between 500 and 900 CE, placing it roughly contemporary with the classic Maya and well before the Inca Empire. During this period, Tiwanaku controlled a vast territory, extending influence across much of what is now Bolivia, Peru, and parts of Chile and Argentina. The city itself might have housed 20,000 people or more, making it one of the largest urban centers in South America at the time. But some researchers have argued for a much earlier date. They point to geological evidence suggesting that the stone blocks show erosion patterns consistent with extended exposure to water, not just rain, but possibly lake water. According to this theory, parts of Tiwanaku might have been built when Lake Titicaca's water level was significantly higher than it is today, which would push the construction date back thousands of years, possibly to 15,000 BCE or earlier. The mainstream archaeological community generally rejects these early dating claims, arguing that the erosion patterns can be explained by rain, groundwater, and the passage of time without requiring Lake Titicaca to have been at a different level. The debate highlights a broader tension in archaeology. How much weight should we give to geological evidence versus carbon dating and stratigraphic analysis? What isn't disputed is that Tiwanaku represents an extraordinary achievement. The people who built it created one of the great civilizations of ancient America. They developed sophisticated agricultural techniques, including raised field systems that maximized crop yields in the harsh altiplano environment. They created a religious and political center that influenced cultures across a vast area, and they worked stone with a level of precision and artistry that remains impressive today. Yet for all its achievements, Tiwanaku was eventually abandoned. Sometime around 1000 CE, the civilization collapsed. The reasons aren't entirely clear. Some evidence suggests a prolonged drought made agriculture unsustainable. Political instability might have played a role. Possibly a combination of environmental and social factors led to the city's decline. Whatever the cause, by the time the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, Tiwanaku had been abandoned for 500 years. Its buildings already ruined, its purpose forgotten. The Inca, who rose to power several centuries after Tiwanaku's fall, incorporated the ruins into their own mythology. They believed Tiwanaku was where the world was created, where the god Viracocha formed the sun, moon, and stars. They treated it as a sacred site, visiting it on pilgrimages, leaving offerings among the ancient stones. In a sense, they did what humans always do when confronted with ruins they don't understand. They wove them into stories, gave them meaning, tried to connect themselves to the mystery. Modern visitors do much the same. They walk among the stones, take photographs, try to imagine what these structures looked like when they were new and complete. But there's a gap between what we can see and what we can understand. The stones tell us that sophisticated engineering happened here. The artifacts tell us that skilled artisans worked here. But the why, the deeper purpose, the beliefs, the knowledge systems that made all this possible, those remain locked in the past, accessible only through fragments and guesses. Stand in the center of the Kalasasaya platform at noon, when the sun is directly overhead and the shadows disappear. The wind blows constantly at this altitude, cold and relentless. The mountains surround you on all sides, and the stones, perfectly fitted, precisely aligned, still standing after 1,000 years, remind you that humans are capable of creating things that outlast memory itself. We may forget why we built them, but the stones remember that we did. Everyone knows Stonehenge. It's become so iconic, so thoroughly absorbed into popular culture, that it's easy to forget how genuinely strange it is. Massive stones arranged in concentric circles, standing in the middle of a windswept plain, with no obvious practical purpose. No nearby settlement that would have needed such a monument. No natural feature that would explain why this particular spot was chosen. Just stones weighing up to 25 tons each, transported from quarries dozens of miles away, erected with tremendous effort, and then, according to the archaeological record, used for ceremonies and rituals we can only guess at. The construction of Stonehenge happened in phases spanning more than 1,500 years. The earliest phase, around 3000 BCE, was a simple circular ditch and bank, what archaeologists call a henge. Over the following centuries, the site was gradually elaborated. First came the blue stones, smaller stones, each weighing around 4 tons, transported from the Prehistoric hills in Wales, more than 150 miles away. Then came the massive sarsen stones, the ones that form the iconic outer circle and the inner horseshoe of trilithons. These sarsen stones are something else. They're blocks of silicified sandstone, quarried from the Marlborough Downs about 20 miles north of Stonehenge. Each stone weighs between 15 and 25 tons. They were shaped and dressed, smoothed on their surfaces, given tenon joints on top, and mortise holes in the lintels that would rest on them. The lintels themselves are carved with a slight curve, so when placed end to end around the circle, they form a smooth, continuous ring. This kind of joinery is what you'd expect to find in woodworking, not stonework. Someone, or more accurately, many people over many generations, made the decision to treat these massive stones as if they were timber beams, carving them with techniques borrowed from wooden construction. The effort required is almost incomprehensible. These aren't soft stones. Sarsen is incredibly hard, difficult to shape even with metal tools, and the builders of Stonehenge were working with stone mauls and antler picks. The most famous feature of Stonehenge is its astronomical alignments. Everyone knows about the summer solstice. On the longest day of the year, the sun rises directly over the heel stone when viewed from the center of the monument. What's less well known is that Stonehenge also marks the winter solstice sunset, and possibly various lunar cycles as well. Some researchers have identified dozens of astronomical alignments in the placement of the stones, suggesting the monument functioned as a sophisticated calendar or observatory. But here's where things get complicated. The alignments only work if you're standing in specific locations within the monument. Move a few feet to one side or the other, and the alignment disappears. This suggests that the monument wasn't just about observing celestial events, it was about being in the right place at the right time, participating in something that required precise positioning. Ceremony, in other words, not just calculation. Recent excavations around Stonehenge have revealed that it wasn't an isolated monument. The entire landscape is dotted with henges, barrows, pits, and post holes, evidence of extensive ceremonial activity spanning thousands of years. Durrington Walls, about 2 miles northeast of Stonehenge, was a massive henge containing a settlement that might have housed several thousand people, at least seasonally. Animal bones found there suggest enormous feasts, hundreds of pigs slaughtered and consumed, probably during ceremonies or festivals. So Stonehenge wasn't alone. It was part of a ritual landscape, possibly the most important site in a network of ceremonial locations. People came here from across Britain. We know this because archaeologists have analyzed the isotopes in human remains found buried at Stonehenge and determined that some individuals traveled hundreds of miles to be here. This was a pilgrimage site, a place of regional or even national significance. What were they doing here? The most common theory is that Stonehenge was a temple dedicated to ancestor worship. The cremated remains of more than 60 individuals have been found at the site, suggesting it served as a burial ground for elite members of society. The astronomical alignments might have been tied to beliefs about death and rebirth. The winter solstice representing the death of the sun and its subsequent rebirth as days begin to lengthen again. Another theory suggests Stonehenge was a healing temple. Some of the human remains show evidence of trauma and disease. Perhaps people made the journey to Stonehenge seeking healing, believing the stones possessed special properties. The blue stones, in particular, were thought to have healing powers in Welsh folklore. Though whether this belief predates Stonehenge or arose because of it is impossible to say. There's also the question of sound. Recent acoustic studies have revealed that the stone circle would have created interesting sound effects during ceremonies. Voices and music would have echoed off the stones in particular ways, possibly creating an immersive, almost hallucinogenic auditory experience for people inside the circle. Combine that with whatever rituals were being performed, possibly with the aid of mind-altering substances, and you have the ingredients for powerful religious experiences. What frustrates modern researchers is how much we don't know. We don't know what language the builders spoke. We don't know their myths or their religious beliefs. We don't know exactly how they organized their society or what social structures made possible the construction of Stonehenge. We have stones and bones and pottery fragments, the physical remains of a culture, but the ideas, the beliefs, the reasons why they did what they did, those are gone. And maybe that's appropriate. Stonehenge has been mysterious for most of its existence. By the time the Romans arrived in Britain, Stonehenge was already ancient, and its purpose forgotten. Medieval people called it the Giant's Dance, and believed it had been magically transported from Ireland by the wizard Merlin. The truth, that Neolithic people built it over centuries using nothing but muscle power and determination, is in some ways more remarkable than the legends. Visit Stonehenge today, and you'll be kept at a distance. Ropes and paths ensure you can't touch the stones or walk among them, except during special access times. It's understandable. 2 million people visit every year. The stones need protection. But there's something lost in that distance. You can't feel the cold roughness of the sarsen, can't stand in the center and experience the alignments as the builders intended, can't quite connect with the physical reality of what was accomplished here. But perhaps that distance is honest. Perhaps it reminds us that however much we study these stones, however many theories we develop, we're still separated from their builders by 5,000 years and an unbridgeable gap in understanding. We're visitors to someone else's sacred site, tourists in a temple whose gods we can't name and whose rituals we can only imagine. The stones remain, the meaning left with those who placed them. About an hour north of Dublin, in the valley of the River Boyne, there's a massive mound of earth and stone called NEWGRANGE. At first glance, it looks like a natural hill, just another feature of the Irish landscape. But get closer and you'll see the white quartz facade, the spiral carvings on massive curbstones at the entrance, the carefully constructed passageway leading into the heart of the mound. This isn't a hill, it's a tomb, and it's older than the pyramids of Egypt, older than Stonehenge, older than almost any standing structure on Earth. NEWGRANGE was built around 3200 BCE, during the Neolithic period, by farming communities that had settled in the Boyne Valley. The mound is enormous, 300 feet in diameter, 45 feet high, covering more than an acre of ground. The white quartz facade that you see today is a reconstruction, but it's based on the thousands of quartz stones that were found collapsed at the base of the mound during excavations in the 1960s. The builders brought these white stones from mountains 40 miles away. They also brought rounded granite boulders from the Mourne Mountains to the north and large slabs of stone from local sources. The construction required massive amounts of labor. The mound itself contains approximately 200,000 tons of material: stone, earth, clay, and shale, all layered and packed to create a watertight structure. And it worked. 5,000 years later, the interior chambers remain dry, protected by a roof of overlapping stones that have never shifted or settled. But the real marvel of NEWGRANGE isn't its size or its construction. It's what happens once a year for about 17 minutes on the morning of the winter solstice. As the sun rises, a beam of light enters through a specially designed roof box above the entrance. This beam travels down the 60-foot passage and illuminates the central chamber at the heart of the mound. For those 17 minutes, light fills the space, touching the stones with warmth and brightness, and then it's gone. Darkness returns for another year. The precision required to create this effect is extraordinary. The passage is perfectly aligned to the winter solstice sunrise, not just approximately, but exactly. Over 5,000 years, the Earth's axial tilt has shifted slightly, so the alignment isn't quite as perfect as it once was. But when NEWGRANGE was built, that beam of light would have hit the back wall of the chamber with pinpoint accuracy. Why go to such effort? The orthodox interpretation is that NEWGRANGE was a tomb. The remains of at least 5 individuals were found in the chamber, along with grave goods, including stone balls, pins, and pendants. The winter solstice event might have been related to beliefs about death and rebirth. The darkest day of the year, when the sun's power is at its weakest, but also the moment when the sun begins its return journey, days gradually lengthening. Perhaps the light entering the tomb symbolized the journey of the deceased into the afterlife, or the promise of rebirth. But there's another possibility. Some researchers have suggested that NEWGRANGE wasn't primarily a tomb at all, but an astronomical observatory and ceremonial center. The cremated remains might have been added later, or might represent only a few individuals out of many who used the site over centuries. The astronomical knowledge required to create the solstice alignment suggests a sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics, knowledge that would have been valuable for agricultural societies dependent on knowing when to plant and harvest. The carvings add another layer of mystery. The entrance stone is covered in elaborate spirals and geometric patterns. Similar carvings appear on stones throughout the passage and chamber. These aren't random doodles. They're carefully executed patterns that appear repeatedly throughout NEWGRANGE and at other contemporary sites in Ireland and across Europe. Triple spirals, concentric circles, zigzag patterns, they clearly meant something to the people who carved them. What did they mean? Nobody knows. Some researchers have suggested they represent celestial events. The spirals might be sun symbols, the zigzags might represent water or lightning. Others think they're maps of the surrounding landscape or symbolic representations of journeys into the afterlife. Still others believe they might be abstract expressions of altered states of consciousness, images experienced during shamanic rituals or trance states. The truth is, we're looking at a symbolic language we can't read. We can recognize that these patterns are meaningful, that they were important enough to be carved repeatedly on some of the most significant stones in the structure. But the key to understanding them died with the people who created them. The chamber itself is a marvel of engineering. The ceiling is corbelled. Each layer of stones extends slightly inward from the layer below, gradually closing the gap until a single capstone can cover the opening. This technique distributes weight evenly and creates a stable structure that has lasted 5 millennia. The chamber floor is higher than the entrance passage, so even if water does seep in, it drains away rather than pooling in the chamber. In 2 of the 3 alcoves that branch off from the main chamber, you'll find large stone basins, shallow bowls carved from single blocks of stone. These might have held cremated remains, or they might have been used for offerings or ritual purposes. Their presence suggests that whatever happened in this chamber involved deliberate placement of objects or remains in specific locations. Today, NEWGRANGE is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of Ireland's most popular tourist attractions. Every year, a lottery is held to select the 50 people who will be allowed inside the chamber during the winter solstice. thousands apply. The lucky few who are chosen gather in the pre-dawn darkness, walking down that ancient passage, standing in the chamber that was old when Rome was young, waiting for the sun to find its way inside. And when it does, when that beam of light travels down the passage and illuminates the chamber, you're experiencing something that has happened reliably, predictably, for 5,000 years. The people who built this are gone. Their language is forgotten. Their beliefs are mysteries. But their achievement, this monument that captures the sun on the shortest day of the year, that endures. There's something humbling about standing in NEWGRANGE, something that puts our modern lives into perspective. We think of ourselves as advanced, sophisticated, the culmination of progress. And yet 5,000 years ago, people with stone tools and no written language created something so precisely engineered that it still functions exactly as intended. Something so aesthetically powerful that it moves visitors to tears. Something so astronomically accurate that it demonstrates knowledge we barely give them credit for possessing. They knew things we've forgotten. They could do things we struggle to explain. And they left us this: a tomb, a temple, an observatory, a message carved in stone and light, saying, "We were here, we understood, we created, remember us." The mound remains, the light returns, the message endures. 20 miles north of Stonehenge, there's another stone circle. Most people have never heard of it, despite the fact that it's much larger than its famous neighbor. So large, in fact, that a modern village sits entirely within its boundaries. Houses, a pub, a church, all surrounded by ancient standing stones and enclosed within a massive circular earthwork. This is AVEBURY, and by any reasonable measure, it should be more famous than Stonehenge. But it isn't, possibly because it's less photogenic, less iconic, spread out over such a large area that its full scale is hard to appreciate from ground level. The AVEBURY Monument Complex is massive. The main feature is a circular bank and ditch called a henge, enclosing an area of about 28 acres. Inside this henge are 3 stone circles, one large outer circle and 2 smaller circles within it. The outer circle originally contained around 100 standing stones, though only 27 remain today. Some of the stones weigh more than 40 tons. They weren't shaped or dressed like those at Stonehenge. They were erected roughly as they came from the ground, chosen for their impressive size and natural forms. The construction of AVEBURY began around 2850 BCE, making it roughly contemporary with the early phases of Stonehenge. The sheer amount of labor involved is staggering. The ditch surrounding the stone circles was dug using antler picks and ox shoulder blades as shovels, excavating a trench 30 feet deep and creating a bank that originally stood 17 feet high. Archaeologists estimate this would have required somewhere around 1.5 million hours of labor, generations of work, all dedicated to creating this ceremonial landscape. And AVEBURY isn't alone. The surrounding landscape is dotted with other Neolithic monuments. To the west is Windmill Hill, one of the largest causewayed enclosures in Britain, a series of concentric ditches used for seasonal gatherings and ceremonies. To the south, a stone avenue called the West Kennet Avenue once connected AVEBURY to a smaller stone circle called the Sanctuary. Another avenue, now mostly destroyed, led southward to a site called Beckhampton. The most mysterious feature in the area is Silbury Hill, about a mile south of Avebury. It's the largest prehistoric mound in Europe, 130 feet high, covering more than 5 acres, containing about 12 million cubic feet of chalk and earth. It was built around 2400 BCE, taking an estimated 18 million hours of labor to complete. And here's the strange part. There's nothing inside it. No burial chamber, no hidden temple, no obvious purpose. It's just an enormous mound of earth, precisely shaped into a flat-topped cone, standing in the middle of the valley for reasons that remain completely unclear. So what was Avebury? The most straightforward answer is that it was a ceremonial center, a place where Neolithic communities gathered for religious rituals, seasonal festivals, and important social events. The sheer size of the monument suggests it served a large area. Dozens of communities, perhaps thousands of people, all participating in ceremonies held within those stone circles. The lack of astronomical alignments is interesting. Unlike Stonehenge, Avebury doesn't seem to have been oriented to celestial events. The stones don't mark solstices or equinoxes. There's no obvious relationship to the sun, moon, or stars. This suggests that whatever happened at Avebury was less about observing the heavens and more about the ceremonies themselves, perhaps processions along the avenues, rituals performed within the circles, gatherings that reinforced social bonds and shared identities. The avenues are particularly intriguing. These weren't just paths. They were formal processional routes, lined with standing stones, carefully selected to alternate between 2 different types. Some stones are tall and thin, roughly pillar-shaped. Others are broad and diamond-shaped. Archaeologists have suggested these might represent male and female forms, creating a symbolic pathway between masculine and feminine aspects of whatever deities or cosmic forces the Neolithic people believed in. Walking down what remains of these avenues, it's not hard to imagine processions. Groups of people moving between the circles, carrying offerings, chanting or singing, participating in rituals that connected them to their ancestors and to the landscape itself. The stones would have created a kind of sacred corridor, separating the procession from the ordinary world, marking the transition into sacred space. But much of Avebury has been lost. During the medieval period, when Christianity had become dominant and pagan sites were viewed with suspicion, many of the stones were deliberately toppled and buried. Later, during the 17th and 18th centuries, more stones were broken up for building materials. The village expanded, houses were built using stone from the ancient monuments, and the site's original form was increasingly obscured. It wasn't until the 1930s that serious efforts began to restore Avebury. An archaeologist named Alexander Keeler bought much of the site and began excavating, re-erecting fallen stones, and uncovering stones that had been buried. Today, concrete markers show where stones once stood but have been lost entirely. It gives you a sense of the original scale, but also of how much has disappeared. What remains still has power. Walk into the center of the Great Circle on a quiet morning when the tourists haven't arrived yet. Stand among those massive stones and you can feel something. Not supernatural exactly, but a weight of history, a sense of connection to people who stood in this same spot 5,000 years ago, looking at these same stones, participating in ceremonies we can't reconstruct, but whose importance was so great that they justified generations of labor. The people who built Avebury left no written records. We don't know their name for the place, don't know what gods they worshipped or what myths explained their world. But we know they gathered here, that this landscape meant something profound to them, that they invested enormous amounts of time and energy into creating a ceremonial center that would outlast them. And it has. Houses have been built and demolished. The village has grown and shrunk. Religions have risen and fallen. But the stones remain, standing in their circles, still marking this as a special place, even though we no longer understand why it was special or what happened here in the darkness of prehistory. There's a pub in AVEBURY called the Red Lion, built in the 17th century, standing right in the middle of the stone circle. You can sit there with a pint, looking out the window at Neolithic standing stones, at earthworks older than Egyptian pyramids, at monuments that were ancient when the Romans invaded Britain. It's an odd juxtaposition, the mundane and the mysterious, the modern and the timeless, all coexisting in the same space. Maybe that's the real lesson of AVEBURY. These monuments aren't separate from life. They're part of the landscape, woven into the fabric of human experience across millennia. The stones have stood through countless generations, witnessing everything, saying nothing, keeping secrets we may never uncover. Time passes. The stones remain. The island of Malta sits in the middle of the Mediterranean, equidistant from Sicily and the North African coast. It's small, just 120 square miles, but what it lacks in size, it makes up for in archaeological significance. This tiny island is home to some of the oldest freestanding stone structures on Earth, and the most remarkable of these is MNAJDRA, a temple complex perched on a clifftop on Malta's southern coast, built between 3,600 and 3,200 BCE, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, older than almost anything humanity has created that's still standing. MNAJDRA isn't just one temple. It's a complex of 3 structures built over several centuries. The oldest is relatively small and simple. The youngest, called the South Temple, is a masterpiece of Neolithic engineering. Its walls are made of carefully shaped limestone blocks, some weighing several tons, fitted together without mortar. The layout follows a distinctive pattern found throughout Malta's megalithic temples, a trefoil design, with a central passage leading to a semicircular apses on either side, like a cloverleaf viewed from above. The precision of the construction is remarkable. The builders didn't have metal tools. They shaped these stones using other stones, probably flint or harder limestone, spending hours upon hours pecking and grinding surfaces until they achieved the desired shape. The floors are made of massive limestone slabs called torba, placed so carefully that they've remained level for more than 5,000 years. But what makes MNAJDRA truly extraordinary is its astronomical alignments. The South Temple is oriented precisely to the equinoxes and solstices. On the spring and fall equinoxes, the rising sun shines through the main entrance and illuminates the central axis of the temple. During the summer and winter solstices, the sunlight strikes specific stones along the temple walls, different stones for each solstice, creating a kind of solar calendar built into the architecture itself. Think about what this means. 5,500 years ago, the people who built MNAJDRA understood the relationship between the sun's position and the changing seasons well enough to encode it in permanent stone architecture. They knew precisely where the sun would rise on the equinoxes and solstices. They oriented their temple, positioned its stones, and created openings that would capture specific rays of light on specific days of the year. This wasn't casual observation. This was sophisticated astronomical knowledge, applied with engineering precision. And it raises uncomfortable questions about how we've understood Neolithic societies. These weren't primitive people stumbling towards civilization. These were skilled architects, astronomers, and engineers who possessed knowledge and capabilities we've consistently underestimated. The walls of MNAJDRA contain another mystery, decorative elements that appear throughout Malta's megalithic temples, holes drilled into stone surfaces in regular patterns, relief carvings of spirals and abstract designs, altars made from single blocks of limestone, their surfaces smooth and worn from use. What rituals took place here? What offerings were made on those altars? What did the spirals represent? We know from other megalithic temples on Malta that animal sacrifice was practiced. Archaeologists have found deposits of animal bones at several sites. We also know that the temples contained small carved figurines, some depicting enormously fat human figures, others showing animals or abstract forms. The most famous of these, the Sleeping Lady, found at the Hypogum of Hal Saflieni, shows a reclining female figure on what appears to be a bed or altar. These clues suggest that the temples were centers of religious activity, possibly dedicated to a mother goddess or fertility cult. The trefoil layout might represent the womb, with the central passage symbolizing birth or rebirth. The astronomical alignments would connect these concepts to the cycles of the sun, the seasons, the eternal patterns of death and renewal that govern agricultural life. But here's what we don't know. We don't know what language these people spoke, what myths they told, what names they gave their gods. We don't know their social structure, how they organized labor, who decided where to build temples, and when. We don't know how they transported these massive stones. The terrain around MNAJDRA is rocky and uneven, with no obvious route for moving multi-ton blocks from quarries to the building site. The civilization that built these temples flourished on Malta for about 1,500 years, from roughly 3,600 to 2,500 BCE. Then suddenly, it ended. The temples were abandoned. The islands seemed to have been depopulated. When new settlers arrived centuries later, they found the temples already ancient, already mysterious. Some researchers have suggested climate change or environmental degradation made the islands uninhabitable. Others point to evidence of violence. We simply don't know what caused the collapse of Malta's temple-building culture. What we do know is that MNAJDRA survived. Unlike many ancient structures that were dismantled for building materials or destroyed by later inhabitants, the Maltese temples remained largely intact, possibly because people recognized them as sacred even when their original purpose had been forgotten. When the Romans controlled Malta, they avoided the temples, leaving them undisturbed. Medieval Maltese people called them giants' towers and attributed them to supernatural beings. Modern science has confirmed what local tradition always maintained. These structures are extraordinarily old, among the oldest buildings humanity has created, and they demonstrate capabilities we rarely associate with Stone Age societies: astronomical knowledge, engineering skill, artistic sensibility, and the social organization necessary to complete multi-generational building projects. Visit MNAJDRA on a clear morning before the tour buses arrive, and you can walk through those ancient passages alone. The stones are still there, massive and patient, arranged according to celestial patterns. The sun still rises over the Mediterranean, still finds its way through the carefully positioned openings, still illuminates the interior on the equinoxes, just as it has for 55 centuries. The people who built this are gone, vanished so completely that we don't even know what they called themselves, but their achievement remains. This temple carved from stone, this calendar written in architecture, this attempt to connect human ritual with cosmic patterns that govern the universe. They reached for permanence, and in a way they couldn't have anticipated, they achieved it. Not through written records or passed down stories, but through stone, mute, patient, enduring, standing on a clifftop in the Mediterranean, still marking the seasons, still capturing the sun, still demonstrating that our ancestors understood far more than we give them credit for. The temples remain, the knowledge endures, the mystery deepens. In the middle of the Golan Heights, on a windswept volcanic plateau between Israel and Syria, there's a structure so large that you can't appreciate its form from ground level. You need to be in the air, looking down, to see what it really is. 5 concentric circles of stacked basalt stones, the largest measuring more than 500 feet in diameter, with walls up to 8 feet high in some places. The locals call it RUJM EL-HIRI, Arabic for stone heap of the wild cat. Archaeologists call it Gilgal Rephaim, Hebrew for wheel of giants. Both names acknowledge that this is something massive, something strange, something that doesn't fit easily into our understanding of the ancient past. The structure dates to the early Bronze Age, somewhere between 3000 and 2700 BCE, making it roughly contemporary with the early Egyptian dynasties and predating Solomon's Temple by nearly 2,000 years. It consists of those 5 concentric circles, connected by radial walls that create a pattern like spokes on a wheel. The total weight of stone used in the construction is estimated at around 40,000 tons. Basalt rocks gathered from the surrounding volcanic field, transported to the site and carefully stacked into these massive circular formations. At the center of the circles sits a burial chamber, though this appears to have been added later, possibly around 2000 BCE, long after the original circles were built. The tomb is a simple stone cyst containing a single individual, but its placement at the exact center of this enormous structure suggests that whoever was buried there held considerable importance, or that later generations recognized this location as sacred and chose it as a burial site for someone of high status. The purpose of RUJM EL-HIRI remains deeply mysterious. The most popular theory is astronomical, that the structure functioned as an observatory or calendar. Some researchers have identified alignments between certain gaps in the walls and the positions of stars at specific times of year during the Bronze Age. Others point to possible solar alignments, particularly related to the summer solstice. One study suggested that the northeastern opening in the outermost circle aligns with the sunrise on the longest day of the year as it would have appeared 5,000 years ago. But the astronomical interpretation has problems. The alignments aren't as precise as those found at other ancient observatories. The walls are low and irregular, making them impractical for sighting celestial objects with any accuracy. And if this was meant to track the sun and stars, Why build 5 concentric circles when a simpler structure would have sufficed? An alternative theory suggests RUJM el-HIRI was a ceremonial center, a place where Bronze Age communities gathered for religious rituals. The concentric circles could have represented different levels of sacred space, with access to the inner circles restricted to priests or elites. Processions might have moved along the radial pathways, approaching the center through a series of symbolic transitions from the profane outer world to the sacred inner sanctum. This interpretation makes some sense. The effort required to build RUJM el-HIRI would only be justified for something of tremendous cultural or religious importance. 40,000 tons of stone represents millions of hours of labor, gathering, transporting, and stacking basalt rocks across acres of land, all to create a structure with no obvious practical function. This had to mean something profound to the people who built it. There's also the possibility that RUJM el-HIRI served multiple purposes over its long use life. Perhaps it began as an astronomical marker or territorial boundary, later became a ceremonial center, and eventually was consecrated as a burial ground when the central tomb was added. Ancient monuments often accumulated layers of meaning and use as centuries passed, and new generations reinterpreted the achievements of their ancestors. What's particularly interesting is that RUJM el-HIRI isn't unique. Similar circular stone structures, though generally smaller, have been found throughout the Levant and Jordan. They're called wheel structures or desert kites, and they appear to be a recurring form in the architecture of Bronze Age Middle Eastern cultures. Some are clearly burial sites, others have no obvious purpose. Together, they suggest a shared tradition, a common set of ideas about how to mark important locations or create sacred spaces. The Golan Heights has been a contested border region for millennia, passing between different kingdoms, empires, and modern nation-states. RUJM el-HIRI has stood through all of it: wars, conquests, the rise and fall of civilizations. It was old when the Israelites entered Canaan, ancient when the Romans built their roads through the region, already a mysterious ruin when archaeologists first began studying it in the late 20th century. Local legends offer their own explanations. Some Bedouin traditions hold that the site marks the burial place of Og, the giant king of Bashan mentioned in the Old Testament. Others suggest it's a remnant from before the biblical flood, built by a race of giants who inhabited the earth in ancient times. These stories probably tell us more about human psychology than about the structure's true origins. Confronted with something massive and inexplicable, people reach for explanations involving beings more powerful than ordinary humans. Modern archaeologists are more cautious in their interpretations, but they're not much closer to certainty. Recent surveys using ground-penetrating radar have revealed that there may be additional features buried beneath the surface, possible structures or patterns that could provide new clues about the site's purpose. Excavations continue, slowly revealing more details about construction techniques, the sequence of building phases, and the relationship between the circles and the central tomb. One thing that's clear is the level of planning required. Creating 5 perfectly concentric circles over 500 feet in diameter requires accurate measurement and careful surveying. The builders would have needed to establish a central point, then measure out equal distances in all directions to create the circles. They would have needed to coordinate teams of workers, organize the collection and transportation of stones, and maintain the project over however many years or decades it took to complete. This implies social organization, leadership, shared purpose, all the elements of what we'd call civilization, even if this was happening thousands of years before cities and writing emerged in the region. The people who built RUJM EL-HIRI were capable of abstract planning, mathematical thinking, and large-scale coordination. They weren't primitive. They were sophisticated, organized, and determined to create something that would outlast them. Stand in the center of RUJM EL-HIRI, at the burial chamber that was added 2,000 years after the circles were built, and you're at a point that has been significant for 5,000 years. Different cultures, different beliefs, different purposes, but all recognizing this location as meaningful, as special, as worthy of respect and preservation. Why did the Bronze Age people build it? We may never know with certainty. The astronomical alignments suggest one purpose. The ceremonial interpretation suggests another. The later burial indicates yet another layer of meaning. Perhaps all of these are partially true. Perhaps RUJM EL-HIRI was all of these things: observatory, temple, burial ground, territorial marker, its purpose evolving as the centuries passed and new generations inherited the structure without fully understanding what their ancestors had intended. The stones remain, the circles endure, the wheel of giants turns through time, carrying its secrets into an uncertain future where archaeologists still search for answers among the basalt rocks of an ancient, enigmatic monument. On the island of Java, about 70 miles southwest of Jakarta, there's a mountain called Gunung Padang, Mountain of Light, or Mountain of Enlightenment, in the local Sundanese language. For centuries, people in the area considered it a sacred place, visiting it for meditation and spiritual practices. Local legends spoke of an ancient king who built a palace here in a single night with the help of supernatural beings. But it wasn't until 1914 that anyone from outside the region paid much attention to what sits on top of that mountain. What they found was a massive megalithic site, terrace structures built from columnar basalt, the same volcanic rock that forms the Giant's Causeway in Ireland and the Devil's Postpile in California. But these columns weren't natural. They'd been shaped, transported, and deliberately arranged into walls, courtyards, and platforms covering nearly 100 acres of the hilltop. The visible surface structures date to around 2000 BCE, making Gunung Padang one of the oldest megalithic sites in Southeast Asia. But that's just the surface, and this is where Gunung Padang becomes one of the most controversial archaeological sites in the world. In 2010, a team of Indonesian researchers began using ground-penetrating radar, seismic surveys, and electrical resistivity imaging to study what lies beneath the visible terraces. What they found was astonishing. Buried beneath the surface structures, they detected multiple layers of construction extending deep underground. According to their analysis, these buried layers showed evidence of chambers, tunnels, and massive stone structures hidden beneath soil and vegetation. More controversially, the team's geological analysis suggested that the deeper layers might be far older than the surface structures, possibly 10,000 to 20,000 years old, or even older, according to some interpretations. If true, this would make Gunung Padang not just one of the oldest megalithic sites in Asia, but one of the oldest constructed sites anywhere on Earth, predating Göbekli Tepe by thousands of years. The mainstream archaeological community has been deeply skeptical of these claims. Critics point out that the geological formations beneath the surface could be natural volcanic features rather than human-made structures. The dating methods used have been questioned. The researchers dated the soil layers between structures, not the structures themselves, which could give misleading ages if natural geological processes moved soil around over millennia. The debate has become heated, sometimes contentious. The Indonesian government has supported further research, seeing Gunung Padang as potentially revolutionizing our understanding of ancient Southeast Asian civilizations. International archaeologists have urged caution, warning against making dramatic claims before more rigorous excavation and analysis can be completed. Both sides make valid points, and the truth probably lies somewhere between the extremes. What isn't disputed is that the surface structures at Gunung Padang are genuine megalithic constructions requiring significant labor and planning. The columnar basalt stones, some weighing several tons, were quarried from elsewhere on the mountain and transported to the summit. They were arranged into 5 terraces, connected by stone staircases, with what appears to be a large courtyard or plaza at the highest level. The purpose of the site remains unclear. Some researchers believe it was a ceremonial center, a mountain sanctuary, where ancient communities gathered for religious rituals. The alignment of certain structures suggests possible astronomical purposes. One study identified potential alignments to the winter solstice sunrise, though as with many such claims, not all researchers agree on the significance. Local traditions add another layer of interpretation. For generations, people in the area have considered Gunung Padang a spiritually powerful location. Meditation practitioners report unusual experiences at the site. Heightened states of consciousness, visions, feelings of connection to ancient wisdom. Skeptics would attribute this to the power of suggestion or the natural effects of being in a dramatic location. Believers see it as evidence that the site was designed to facilitate altered states of consciousness, that the ancient builders understood something about this location that modern science hasn't yet recognized. One intriguing aspect of Gunung Padang is its relationship to other megalithic sites in the region. Southeast Asia has numerous ancient stone structures, from the temples of Angkor to the mysterious stone jars of Laos to the megalithic tombs of Indonesia. These sites span thousands of years and represent many different cultures, but they share certain features: the use of massive stones, careful astronomical alignments, association with sacred mountains or elevated locations. This suggests either cultural diffusion, ideas and techniques spreading across the region through trade and contact, or independent development of similar solutions to similar needs. Either way, it indicates that megalithic construction was a significant tradition in ancient Southeast Asia, one that we're only beginning to understand and appreciate. The controversy surrounding Gunung Padang's age and the existence of buried structures will likely continue until more extensive excavation is completed. That work is proceeding, slowly and carefully, with Indonesian and international researchers collaborating to use the most advanced techniques available: core samples, careful stratigraphic analysis, multiple dating methods, all being employed to answer the fundamental question: what exactly is buried beneath that terraced mountain? Whatever the final answer, Gunung Padang represents something important. At minimum, it's a significant megalithic site demonstrating the sophistication of ancient Southeast Asian cultures. At maximum, if the more dramatic age estimates are correct, it would require us to completely rethink the timeline of human civilization, to accept that organized monument-building societies existed thousands of years earlier than we currently believe. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. But that's the nature of archaeology. It's detective work, piecing together clues from fragments and traces left behind by people who couldn't have imagined that millennia later, strangers would be puzzling over their achievements, trying to understand what they built and why. Visit Gunung Padang today, and you'll climb those stone staircases, walk across those ancient terraces, touch those columnar basalt walls that have stood for at least 4,000 years, possibly much longer. You'll see local people making offerings, meditating among the stones, maintaining traditions that stretch back through countless generations. And if you're quiet, if you let yourself really feel the place, you might sense what those local traditions have always maintained, that this mountain is special, that something significant happened here long ago, that the stones hold secrets we're only beginning to uncover. The mountain remains, the stones endure, the truth waits, buried beneath layers of earth and time, patient as only stone can be. In the Gourage zone of southern Ethiopia, about 50 miles south of Addis Ababa, there's a field of standing stones that most of the world has never heard of. They're called the TIYA STELAE, a collection of 36 carved stones, some reaching 12 feet in height, arranged in what appears to be a burial ground or ceremonial site. The stones are covered with enigmatic symbols, abstract geometric patterns, representations of swords, humanoid figures with raised arms, carved into the grey basalt with remarkable clarity and precision. The TIYA STELAE are just one part of a much larger phenomenon. Across southern Ethiopia and northern Somalia, you'll find thousands of standing stones, many carved with similar symbols. They're scattered across the landscape, marking burial sites, territorial boundaries, or locations whose significance has been lost to time. The TIYA site is simply the best preserved and most accessible of these stone fields, which is why it earned designation as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1980. Dating the stelae has proven challenging. Most estimates place them between the 12th and 14th centuries CE, making them relatively recent compared to the other sites we've discussed. But some researchers have argued for earlier dates, possibly as far back as the first millennium BCE. The uncertainty comes from the difficulty of dating stone monuments directly. You can only date organic material associated with the stones, and there's always the question of whether that material is contemporary with the stone's construction or was deposited later. The symbols carved into the stones are the real mystery. The sword motifs are clear enough. They represent weapons, possibly commemorating warriors buried beneath the stones. But the other symbols are harder to interpret. The geometric patterns, circles, crescents, X-shapes, parallel lines, might be decorative, or they might represent something specific in the belief system of the people who created them. The human-like figures with raised arms appear on several stones, but we don't know if they represent specific individuals, ancestors, or symbolic representations of the human soul. Excavations beneath and around the stelae have revealed human burials, confirming that at least some of these stones mark graves. The individuals buried here were interred in carefully constructed stone-lined chambers, often placed in fetal positions, accompanied by grave goods including pottery, iron tools, and personal ornaments. This suggests a culture with distinct burial practices, clear beliefs about death and the afterlife, and the organizational capacity to create permanent monuments for their dead. What makes the TIYA STELAE particularly interesting is their connection to a broader cultural tradition across the Horn of Africa. The practice of erecting carved standing stones appears throughout this region, spanning different time periods and different ethnic groups. Some researchers see this as evidence of cultural continuity, a shared tradition passed down through generations and spreading across the landscape as populations moved and cultures interacted. Others point out that standing stones as memorial markers appear in many cultures worldwide, from the Celtic traditions of Britain and Ireland to the Moai of Easter Island, to the Native American grave markers of the Great Plains. Perhaps the impulse to mark significant locations with permanent stone monuments is a universal human trait, emerging independently in different cultures when social complexity reaches a certain threshold. The sword symbols are particularly intriguing because they suggest a warrior culture, a society where martial prowess held significant importance. This aligns with what we know about medieval Ethiopian history, a period of kingdoms and conflicts, of warrior elites and territorial expansion, of cultures that valued military strength and honored their dead fighters with permanent monuments. But here's what frustrates researchers. We don't have written records from the people who erected these stones. Medieval Ethiopia had written language. Ge'ez, an ancient Semitic language still used in Ethiopian Orthodox liturgy. But the stone carvers didn't leave inscriptions. They left symbols, patterns, images that were probably meaningful to their contemporaries, but which we can only guess at today. This is a recurring theme in the study of ancient monuments. The stones survive, but the context vanishes. We're left trying to reconstruct entire belief systems, entire worldviews from physical artifacts alone. It's like finding a book written in an unknown language. You can see that there's information there, that it meant something to someone, but the key to understanding it has been lost. Some local traditions offer their own interpretations. Stories passed down through generations speak of the stones marking the graves of heroes who fell in ancient battles. Other tales describe the stones as boundary markers, delineating territories between different clans or kingdoms. Still others suggest the stones had magical properties, that they were erected to protect the living from malevolent spirits or to ensure that the dead remained peacefully in their graves rather than returning to trouble the living. Modern archaeology tends to discount these folk traditions, seeing them as later inventions, stories created to explain monuments whose original meaning had been forgotten. But oral traditions can preserve kernels of historical truth across centuries. The challenge is distinguishing what might be actual memory from what's creative elaboration or misinterpretation. Recent archaeological work at TIYA has focused on understanding the site's relationship to the surrounding landscape. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have revealed additional buried features, possible structures, more burials, evidence of ceremonial activities. Excavations continue to uncover artifacts that help date the site and understand the lives of the people associated with it. What emerges from this ongoing research is a picture of medieval Ethiopian cultures that were more sophisticated, more connected, and more materially wealthy than they're often given credit for. The TIYA STELAE aren't crude markers scratched together by subsistence farmers. They're carved monuments requiring skilled labor, artistic vision, and the economic surplus to support craftspeople who could spend weeks or months working stone rather than farming or herding. This challenges outdated assumptions about African civilizations south of Egypt and Ethiopia's northern highlands. For too long, Western scholars dismissed or ignored the archaeological achievements of sub-Saharan Africa, assuming that significant civilizations only existed in the north. The STELAE fields of southern Ethiopia, along with other discoveries like the stone ruins of Great Zimbabwe, have forced a reconsideration of these prejudices. Stand among the TIYA STELAE on a quiet afternoon, when the only sounds are wind through grass and distant birdsong, and you're in the presence of a mystery that spans cultures and centuries. These stones were carved by people whose names we don't know, in a language we can't read, for purposes we can only guess at. They mark graves, yes, but they also mark something less tangible. The human need to create permanence, to leave something behind that says, we were here, we lived, we mattered. The stones succeeded in that goal. Centuries after their creators died, millennia after the specific meanings of the symbols were forgotten, the stelae still stand. They've become part of the landscape, witnesses to the passage of generations, guardians of the dead, and reminders that every culture, every society, every group of humans has sought in its own way to transcend mortality through stone. The stones remain. The meanings fade. The human impulse endures. On the western edge of the Isle of Lewis, where the Atlantic crashes against the rocky shores of Scotland's Outer Hebrides, there's a stone circle that has stood for nearly 5,000 years. The Callanish Stones, known in Scottish Gaelic as Clachan Challanais or Tursachan Challanais, form a distinctive cross-shaped pattern unique among British megalithic sites, a circle of 13 stones with a central monolith over 15 feet tall, and radiating outward 4 rows of standing stones creating arms that point roughly to the cardinal directions. The stones were erected around 3000 BCE, roughly contemporary with NEWGRANGE in Ireland and the early phases of Stonehenge. But Callanish has its own character, its own presence. The stones are tall and thin, like frozen flames reaching toward the sky. They're made from the local Lewisian gneiss, some of the oldest rock on Earth, stone that was formed deep underground more than 3 billion years ago and has been standing in these arrangements for 5 millennia. The site's layout is distinctive. Unlike the simple circles of AVEBURY or Stonehenge, Callanish has that cross formation, 5 rows of stones radiating from a central circle. The longest row, the Northern Avenue, contains nearly 20 stones and stretches more than 250 feet. The other 3 rows are shorter, but they create a pattern that's clearly intentional, clearly designed to evoke something beyond mere decoration or random placement. As with so many megalithic sites, the astronomical alignments at Callanish have generated considerable interest and debate. The most striking alignment occurs every 18.6 years, during the southern extreme of the Moon's orbit. At this time, when viewed from Callanish, the Moon appears to skim along the southern horizon, seeming to travel through the stones before setting into a hill formation known as Sleeping Beauty, because its profile resembles a woman lying on her back. This celestial event, combined with the stone alignments, creates a dramatic visual spectacle that would have been impossible to miss for ancient observers. Some researchers have identified additional alignments, possible markers for solstices, equinoxes, and the rising positions of bright stars. Others caution against seeing every stone alignment as astronomically significant, pointing out that with enough stones and enough celestial objects, you'll inevitably find some alignments by pure chance. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in between. The builders of Callanish were almost certainly aware of celestial movements and incorporated some astronomical knowledge into their design. But we should be cautious about claiming they understood more than the evidence truly supports. What's remarkable about Callanish is its location. The Isle of Lewis is remote, isolated, with harsh weather and limited resources. Building a major stone circle here required transporting stones across difficult terrain, organizing labor from a relatively small population, and maintaining the project over however long it took to complete. This suggests that the site held tremendous significance, that whatever happened here was important enough to justify extraordinary effort. The stones weren't always visible as they are today. For centuries, possibly millennia, they were partially buried under peat. The land around Callanish gradually accumulated layers of organic material, slowly covering the lower portions of the stones until only their tops remained visible. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that the peat was cleared away, revealing the full extent of the monument. Imagine the surprise of those early excavators as they removed layers of earth and discovered that these stones, already ancient, already mysterious, were even larger and more impressive than anyone had realized. Local legends have surrounded Callanish for as long as anyone can remember. One story claims the stones are giants who were turned to stone for refusing to convert to Christianity. Another tradition holds that the stones are fallen angels, petrified as punishment for their rebellion. A third legend speaks of a priest-king who commanded the stones to be built and who walks among them, still on certain nights of the year. These stories tell us something important. For generations, people have recognized Callanish as extraordinary, as different, as worthy of explanation, beyond the ordinary. When you don't know the real history of something, when written records don't exist and oral traditions have faded, you create new stories. These legends might not be historically accurate, but they preserve the sense of significance, the recognition that something important happened here. Recent archaeological work has revealed that Callanish wasn't isolated. Scattered across the Isle of Lewis are dozens of other stone circles and standing stones, most much smaller than Callanish, but clearly part of the same cultural tradition. This suggests that the Neolithic inhabitants of Lewis had a sophisticated relationship with their landscape, marking it with stone monuments that served religious, astronomical, social, or territorial purposes. Some researchers have proposed that Callanish was a ceremonial center for the entire region, a place where communities gathered for important festivals or rites of passage. The stone avenues might have been processional routes, with groups approaching the circle, from different directions during ceremonies. The central circle could have been a sacred space where only certain individuals, priests, elders, chosen initiates, were permitted to enter. But we're speculating. We have stones and their arrangements. We have astronomical alignments and evidence of careful planning. We have bones and artifacts that tell us people were here, that they built this, that they used it for something. But the specifics, the rituals, the beliefs, the meanings they attach to the stones and the celestial events, those are lost, locked in a past we can observe but never fully enter. There's something about Callanish that feels different from other stone circles. Maybe it's the location, so far north, so isolated, so exposed to the Atlantic weather. Maybe it's the distinctive cross layout, unique and enigmatic. Or maybe it's the stones themselves, made from rock older than multicellular life on Earth, shaped by humans at the dawn of civilization, standing through 50 centuries of Scottish weather. Visit Callanish on a clear night when the moon is near its extreme, and you can witness something that ancient people witnessed. The moon skimming the southern horizon, seeming to interact with the standing stones, creating a celestial drama played out against the landscape. For that brief period, you're seeing what the builders saw, experiencing what they experienced, connected across 5,000 years by the simple act of watching the sky from this particular spot on Earth. The people who built Callanish are gone. Their language, their names, their stories, all vanished. But their stones remain, perfectly positioned, still marking whatever it was they meant to mark, still pointing to the places where sun and moon rise and set, still creating that cross pattern against the landscape, a symbol whose meaning we can feel, even if we can't quite articulate it. The stones stand, the moon returns, the mystery endures. Just outside Glasgow, in what's now a public park, there's a flat sandstone surface carved with one of the most extensive collections of prehistoric rock art in Europe. It's called the COCHNO stone, and until recently, most people had forgotten it existed. For 50 years, from 1965 to 2015, the stone was deliberately buried under layers of soil and turf to protect it from vandalism. When archaeologists finally excavated it again, they revealed a massive carved surface, about 40 feet by 25 feet, covered with elaborate patterns carved into the rock thousands of years ago. The carvings are what archaeologists call cup and ring marks, shallow depressions surrounded by concentric circles, connected by carved channels, arranged across the stone's surface in complex patterns. This style of rock art is found throughout Britain and Ireland, dating to the Neolithic and Bronze Age periods, roughly 3000 to 1500 BCE. But the COCHNO stone is one of the largest and most elaborate examples ever discovered, containing more than 90 individual symbols across its surface. What do they mean? That's the question that has frustrated archaeologists for more than a century. Cup and ring marks appear across northern Europe, from Scotland and Ireland to Scandinavia and northern Spain. They're clearly meaningful. People spent hours, days, perhaps weeks, pecking these patterns into hard rock. But there's no Rosetta Stone for Neolithic symbols, no key to unlock their meaning. We're left with speculation and educated guesses. The most straightforward interpretation is that they're maps. The cups might represent settlements or significant locations. The rings could indicate territories or zones of influence. The channels might be rivers or pathways connecting different places. Some researchers have even attempted to match the patterns on the COCHNO stone to the local geography, identifying possible correspondences between carved symbols and actual landscape features. Another theory suggests the carvings are astronomical. The cups and rings might represent celestial objects, the sun, moon, stars, or planets. The patterns could be star maps, recording the positions of celestial bodies at specific times. Some of the carvings align with solstice sunrises or important stellar positions, though as with all astronomical claims about ancient monuments, there's debate about whether these alignments are intentional or coincidental. A third possibility is that the carvings are religious or shamanic. They might represent visions experienced during altered states of consciousness, abstract patterns seen during trance or ritual. Many cultures have produced similar geometric patterns in their religious art: spirals, concentric circles, radiating lines, forms that seem to emerge naturally from the human visual system under certain conditions. Or perhaps all of these interpretations contain some truth. The carvings might have served multiple purposes: map-making, astronomy, religious symbolism, territorial markers, all rolled into a single complex system of meaning that we can barely glimpse from our distance in time. What we do know is that creating these carvings required significant effort. The sandstone is relatively soft compared to some rocks, but carving through even soft stone with Neolithic tools, probably harder stone hammers and pecking techniques, would take hours for each individual symbol. The COCHNO stone contains 90 symbols. That represents hundreds, possibly thousands of hours of careful, patient work. The stone was discovered in 1887 by a local minister who noticed the carvings while walking in the area. Initially, it was treated with respect, studied by antiquarians and early archaeologists. But as the 20th century progressed and urban development spread around Glasgow, the stone became vulnerable to vandalism. People carved their initials over the ancient patterns. Paint was splashed on the surface. The decision was made in 1965 to bury it, preserving it for a future generation that might be better equipped to protect and study it. That future generation arrived in 2015, when archaeologists decided the time had come to excavate the stone once more. Modern documentation techniques, 3D scanning, high-resolution photography, careful mapping, could now record every detail of the carvings, creating digital archives that would preserve the information even if the stone itself suffered further damage. The excavation revealed that the stone was in better condition than expected. The burial had protected it. The carvings were still clear, still detailed, still posing their silent questions to anyone who looked at them. And there was a bonus. The excavation uncovered additional carved areas around the main stone, expanding the known extent of the rock art site. But the excavation also raised new questions. Why was this particular location chosen for such an extensive carving project? The stone is on a hillside overlooking the Clyde Valley, a prominent location with good views, but not obviously special in any way that modern observers can identify. Was there something about this place that Neolithic people recognized but we can't see? A spring, perhaps, or a particular geological formation? Or was the location chosen precisely because the flat sandstone surface provided an ideal canvas for carving? The COCHNO stone exists in an uncomfortable space between ancient monument and urban park. It's surrounded by modern Glasgow, hemmed in by housing developments and infrastructure. You can stand on Neolithic rock art and see apartment buildings in the distance. This juxtaposition of ancient and modern is jarring, a reminder that history doesn't exist in isolation. The past and present occupy the same physical space, layered on top of each other, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in conflict. After the 2015 excavation, the stone was once again buried for protection. The site simply couldn't be secured adequately to prevent vandalism, and modern Scotland didn't want to repeat the mistakes of the mid-20th century. So the COCHNO stone sleeps again under its protective layer of soil, waiting for the next generation of archaeologists to disturb its rest, to study its patterns, to ask their questions of symbols carved 5,000 years ago by people whose names we'll never know. This feels appropriate somehow. The stone has spent most of its existence hidden, buried under layers of time, forgotten by the cultures that superseded its creators, occasionally revealed and then concealed again. It's a pattern that repeats throughout the history of ancient monuments. We find them, study them briefly, and then they slip back into obscurity, waiting for the next moment of attention. But the stone is patient. Stone is always patient. The carvings will endure beneath their protective covering, ready to be revealed again when needed, when technology has advanced further, when new techniques might finally unlock the meanings that have eluded us for so long. The COCHNO stone reminds us that mystery isn't always about remote locations or exotic landscapes. Sometimes the deepest mysteries are hiding in plain sight, buried under soccer fields on the outskirts of Glasgow, concealed beneath layers of ordinary earth, waiting patiently for someone to ask the right questions. The stone is there. The carvings endure. The meaning remains hidden for now. 15 places, 15 mysteries, 15 challenges to the neat, linear story we've told ourselves about human history. We began at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, where 12,000-year-old temples forced us to reconsider when civilization truly began. We ended at the COCHNO stone in Scotland, where 5,000-year-old carvings hide beneath a Glasgow park, their meanings as elusive today as when they were first pecked into the stone. Between these bookends, we've traveled across 4 continents, spanning nearly 10,000 years of human achievement. And what have we learned? Not answers. Archaeology rarely provides clean answers. Instead, we've learned better questions. How did Neolithic people, supposedly just learning agriculture, develop the astronomical knowledge evident at sites like NABTA, PLAYA, and MNAJDRA? How did Bronze Age cultures, working with stone and bronze tools, achieve the engineering precision visible at Puma Punku and TIWANAKU? Why do similar ideas, stone circles, astronomical alignments, megalithic construction, appear independently in cultures separated by oceans and millennia? The orthodox answers often feel inadequate. Independent development explains some similarities, but strains credibility when the parallels become too specific. Cultural diffusion could account for shared ideas, but we lack evidence of contact between many of these cultures. Lost knowledge from an even earlier civilization sounds like fantasy, yet the sophistication of the oldest sites makes us wonder what came before, what might still be hidden, what we haven't found yet. Perhaps the truth is simpler and more profound than any of these explanations. Perhaps our ancestors were exactly as intelligent, creative, and capable as we are. They lacked our technology, our accumulated knowledge, our scientific method. But they didn't lack intelligence, observational skills, or the ability to solve problems through ingenuity and persistence. We've underestimated them. For generations, we've looked at ancient monuments and asked, how could primitive people have built this? When we should have been asking, what motivated brilliant people to build this? The question isn't about capability, it's about purpose, meaning, belief. These places weren't just functional. They weren't just calendars or observatories or burial grounds. They were expressions of something deeper, attempts to connect human life with cosmic patterns, to create permanence in an impermanent world, to mark the landscape with meaning that would outlast any individual life or single generation. And they succeeded. Long after the builders died, after their languages were forgotten and their beliefs abandoned, the stones remain. They've outlasted empires, survived climate changes, witnessed the full sweep of recorded history, and stood firm through it all. That's a kind of immortality. Not the immortality of individual consciousness continuing after death. We have no evidence for that. But the immortality of achievement, of creation, of leaving something behind that says, we were here, we understood, we built, remember us. The 15 places we visited are witnesses. They witnessed the Neolithic Revolution, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the rise of Rome, the Middle Ages, the Industrial Revolution, the modern era. They've seen more of human history than any written record could capture. They've stood silent through wars and peace, prosperity and collapse, the birth of religions and their decline, and they'll still be standing long after we're gone. Our cities will crumble, our technology will become obsolete, our certainties will be questioned by future generations who look back at us the way we look back at the Neolithic, wondering how we could have been so naive, so limited in our understanding, so confident in interpretations that would later prove incomplete or wrong. But the stones will remain, patient, enduring, still marking the solstices, still aligned to the stars, still carrying meanings we can sense, even if we can't fully articulate them. This journey has taken us to remote deserts and isolated islands, to highland plateaus and rolling farmland. We've seen massive stones moved impossible distances. We've examined precision engineering that challenges our assumptions. We've encountered astronomical knowledge that shouldn't exist according to conventional timelines. We've stood in spaces deliberately created to capture light on specific days, connecting human ritual with celestial mechanics. And throughout it all, we've been reminded that history is not a settled matter. Every generation rewrites history, reinterprets the past through new eyes, discovers evidence that challenges previous certainties. The story of human civilization is still being written, still being revised, still surprising us with unexpected chapters hidden beneath soil and sand and the assumptions of previous generations. What will the next generation discover? What sites remain hidden, waiting for the right technology or the right question to reveal their secrets? How many Göbekli Tepes are still buried? How many Gunung Padangs conceal chambers beneath the surface? How many COCHNO stones lie forgotten under soccer fields and parking lots? We don't know. We can't know. But that uncertainty is part of what makes archaeology compelling. It's a reminder that for all our knowledge, for all our technology and scientific understanding, we're still just beginning to grasp the full scope of human achievement across the millennia. These 15 places are not isolated anomalies. They're representatives, samples drawn from a much larger population of ancient sites scattered across every continent except Antarctica. Megalithic monuments exist throughout Europe, Asia, Africa, the Americas. Astronomical observatories appear in cultures that supposedly had no contact. Precision engineering emerges independently in multiple locations. This suggests something fundamental about human nature. When we reach a certain level of social complexity, when we develop surplus resources and stable communities, we build monuments. We mark the landscape. We encode our knowledge in permanent form. We reach for immortality through architecture. And we do it with whatever materials and technology we have available. The ancient Egyptians used stone and bronze. The Romans used stone and iron. We use steel and concrete. But the impulse is the same: to create something that will outlast us, to leave evidence of our existence, to connect our brief individual lives with patterns larger than ourselves. As we end this journey, consider one final thought. Every generation believes it has finally figured out the past, that it solved the mysteries, answered the questions, and every generation is proven wrong by the next, which discovers new evidence, develops new techniques, asks different questions that reveal how incomplete previous understanding really was. We're no different. Our interpretations of these 15 sites, our explanations for their construction and purpose, our timelines and theories, all will be revised, refined, possibly overturned by future discoveries. That's not a failure of archaeology or science. That's how knowledge advances, through constant questioning, constant refinement, constant willingness to admit when we were wrong. The stones don't mind. They've endured worse than being misunderstood. They'll wait patiently while we puzzle over them, debate about them, construct and deconstruct theories about their origins and meanings. They'll still be there when we're gone, ready for the next generation of questions, the next era of investigation. These places remind us that we're part of something larger and older than we usually acknowledge. We're the latest chapter in a story that stretches back not just centuries, but millennia. The people who built these monuments were fundamentally like us, curious, creative, determined, capable of extraordinary achievements when motivated by belief or necessity. They solved problems we still can't fully explain. They encoded knowledge we're still trying to decode. They created monuments that have outlasted every political system, every religious movement, every cultural transformation that has occurred since they were built. That's the real mystery, not how they did it, though that remains fascinating. But why it mattered enough to dedicate so much effort, so many resources, so many generations to creating something permanent. Perhaps the answer is simple. Perhaps they knew something we're still learning, that life is brief, individual existence is fragile, but creation endures. What we build with intention and care can outlast us. What we create with purpose can speak to future generations, even when the language and context have been lost. The stones speak still, not in words, but in their presence, their precision, their permanence. They say, humans were here. They observed the heavens. They understood patterns. They worked together. They created. They mattered. And that message, carried in stone, aligned to the stars, built to endure, has survived For 5,000 years, 10,000 years, maybe longer, it will survive us too, standing patient and silent while future generations ask their questions and seek their answers. The stones remain, the mysteries endure, the questions continue, and somewhere beneath soil or sand or modern cities, other monuments wait to be discovered, ready to complicate our stories and challenge our certainties once more. The past is not finished with us yet. Thank you for joining us on this journey through 15 of the world's most mysterious ancient places. If you enjoyed this documentary, please like, subscribe, and share. What ancient mystery would you like us to explore next? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, history is never as simple as it seems.